The chandeliers in Sterling Hall blazed like captured constellations, their crystal prisms scattering golden light across polished oak tables draped in starched ivory linens. Waitstaff glided between clusters of tuxedos and silk gowns, balancing silver trays laden with flutes of vintage champagne and delicate canapes. Laughter rose in practiced waves, the sound of old money congratulating itself for new philanthropy. Amid the orchestrated elegance, 22-year-old Lisa Grant moved with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Her black uniform rendered her nearly invisible, a shadow among the glittering elite, yet the silver bracelet on her wrist caught stray beams of light and flung them back like tiny rebellions. Delicate vines twisted around her deep brown skin, culminating in a single engraved star that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "Flashy for staff, don't you think?" A man's voice cut through the murmur, gruff and amused. Heads turned. Lisa's fingers brushed the metal instinctively, the cool touch grounding her as whispers rippled outward. She had worn this bracelet every day for 20 years. It was the only constant in a life of foster homes and temporary addresses, the sole tether to a beginning she could not remember. Across the room, Jorge Ford's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against fine china. The sound was lost in the din, but his sudden silence was not. The 79-year-old tech titan, whose empire had reshaped global communication, stared as if the world had tilted on its axis. His lips formed a name no one heard. Elena. How could a simple trinket, a server's adornment in a sea of diamonds, unravel the careful scaffolding of 2 decades? How could metal and memory collide with such force that destinies long buried began to stir? 3 days earlier, Lisa's world fit into 450 square feet of sagging queen's efficiency. The wallpaper peeled in corners like old skin, revealing layers of previous tenants' despair. A single leaky faucet dripped a metronome rhythm into the cracked porcelain sink, counting down to final exams that loomed 10 days away. Law textbooks crowded the narrow table, contracts with fluorescent highlights bleeding through pages, ethics annotated in frantic margins, trial preparation notes stacked like precarious towers. Her shifts at elite catering barely covered rent and ramen, but the scholarship demanded perfection. One misstep and the dream of a corner office, of arguing cases that mattered, would dissolve. The mail that afternoon arrived in a tattered envelope, the kind that suggested bad news or junk. Lisa slid it open with a butter knife, spilling contents across her casebook. A birth certificate. Infant girl Grant, State Ward, discovered April 8, 2003, at Harbor General Hospital. No parents listed. A faded Polaroid of the bracelet wrapped around a newborn's ankle. And a note in spidery handwriting from Mrs. Delgado, her foster guardian from ages 10 to 15, who had passed 5 years ago from cancer. "The hospital gave me this when they released you to the system. They said it was all you came with. Kept it safe. Maybe someday it means something." Lisa traced the engraving visible in the photo. March 22, 2003. The metal on her wrist seemed to warm. Footsteps announced Sofia Lopez before the door fully opened. Her flatmate and fellow night shift survivor dropped grocery bags with a theatrical groan. "Tell me that's not another bill," Sofia said, peering over Lisa's shoulder. Her expression softened at the documents. "The bracelet thing again. Mija, you've worn that since we met in freshman orientation. You sure you want to open this can of worms right before finals?" "It's just information," Lisa replied, but her voice lacked conviction. The bracelet had never come off, not for showers or surgeries or the metal detectors at courthouses during mock trials. Removing it felt like severing a limb. Exams first. Mysteries later. Yet that night, she fell asleep with a Polaroid tucked beneath her pillow, dreams threaded with hospital corridors and a woman's voice calling a name that might have been hers. 2 days before the fundraiser, the stuffy office of Elite Catering Services smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. Hank Miller, regional manager and perpetual disappointment to his ex-wives, waved assignment sheets like victory flags. Sterling Hall. Triple pay. Black tie mandatory. His gaze snagged on Lisa's wrist. "No adornments, Grant. Client rules." Jorge Ford's event. The man built half the satellites orbiting Earth. He notices details. Lisa recognized the name from business journals. Ford Technologies. Cloud storage telecommunications, quietly revolutionary. Jorge himself was legend wrapped in tragedy. Widower of Clara Ford, the education reformer who died a decade ago. Childless, solitary, yet his foundation poured millions into youth programs. The kind of man who could buy silence or truth with equal ease. The bracelet stays, she said quietly. Hank opened his mouth to argue, caught something in her expression and shrugged. Your funeral, kid. Concurrent with Lisa's cramped mourning, 12,000 square feet of Ford Manor sprawled across Westchester Hills like a sovereign state. Jorge sat in his den, surrounded by aides finalizing details for the evening's $400 million youth initiative pledge. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed manicured grounds where security patrols moved like clockwork. Victor Klein, chief of staff and oldest friend, reviewed talking points. The governor's office confirmed attendance. Press at 7 sharp. Jorge's attention drifted to the portrait above the fireplace. Elena at 20, laughing in Parisian sunlight, the bracelet gleaming on her wrist. His daughter. His failure. Victor followed his gaze. 20 years tomorrow since the accident. Jorge nodded, throat tight. Elena Ramirez Ford, born 1982, died 2003. 6 months pregnant. The car crash on rain-slicked coastal highway. He had been in Tokyo closing a merger. By the time his jet landed, surgeons fought and lost. The infant, they said, did not survive. Stillborn. The bracelet, commissioned in Paris during Elena's baby moon in March 2002 and engraved the day before her death, vanished from the hospital. Despite private investigators, $1 million reward, and Jorge's considerable influence, no trace. Theft. Hospital negligence. Something darker. The questions had calcified into permanent grief. Lisa balanced her tray with one hand, the other instinctively covering the metal. It was with me when I was found. I've had it my whole life. Murmurs swelled. A woman in emerald silk, Vivian Ford, Jorge's niece and foundation director, materialized at his elbow. Uncle, perhaps a private word. She guided them toward a side corridor, security forming a subtle perimeter. In a small antechamber lined with antique books, Jorge faced Lisa across a mahogany table. Victor Klein entered with 2 others, Inspector Elias Ruiz, NYPD liaison to high-profile cases, and attorney Lena Kim, Ford Family Counsel. The door closed with finality. Jorge extended his hand. May I? Lisa hesitated, then unclasped the bracelet. It lay between them like evidence. He turned it to catch the light, breath catching at the engraving. March 22, 2003. Vines. A star. Identical. This was my daughter's, he said, voice rough. Elena wore it the day she died. How is this possible? Lisa's pulse thundered in her ears. I was abandoned at Harbor General. April 8, 2003. That is 2 souls, separated by decades and circumstance, connected by a circle of silver. One relic to bind them. Fate, indifferent to probability, had arranged their collision. The gala. Moments after the Forks' betrayal. Security moved with practiced efficiency, parting the crowd like water. Jorge approached Lisa with the deliberate pace of a man unaccustomed to hesitation. The hall quieted to breathless anticipation. Young woman, he said, voice carrying the weight of boardrooms and bereavements. That bracelet. Where did you get it? All I know. She recited the details from the birth certificate, each word tasting of rust. Ruiz made notes. Lena Kim's eyes narrowed in calculation. Victor produced a velvet box. Inside, a small silver pin, a clover. Found with Elena's effects, he explained. The hospital claimed no other items. Lisa's hand went to her hip, where a birthmark shaped like a 4-leaf clover had earned childhood teasing. They match, Jorge whispered. The room spun. Connections crystallized. Dates, hospital, the missing infant declared stillborn. We need DNA, Jorge declared. Immediately. The private lab occupied a discreet suite 3 floors below Sterling Hall, arranged by Victor's omnipresent network. Technicians in white coats moved with urgent efficiency. Cheek swabs taken. Blood drawn. Ruiz accessed sealed records on a secure tablet, scrolling through Elena Ford's admission logs. Patient arrived unconscious post-accident. Emergency C-section. Fetal distress noted. Infant female, non-viable. His finger paused. Wait. Dendum. Live birth recorded at 2:14 a.m. transferred to NICU. Nothing. No discharge. No death certificate. Cross-reference with state wards. Pages flipped digitally. Infant girl Grant. Foundling. Harbor General. Prolate. Clover-shaped birthmark, right hip. Lisa lifted her shirt just enough. The mark, unmistakable. Jorge's knees buckled. Victor caught his arm. 20 years of guilt and grief cracked open like Arctic ice. They told me she died, he rasped. They took you from her. From me. Questions cascaded. Who authorized the stillbirth declaration? Why falsify records? The bracelet's disappearance, now explained, pointed to deliberate separation. Hospital staff. A grieving father's enemies. Elena had been investigating corruption in maternal care funding before her death. Coincidence strained credibility. Jorge straightened, the titan re-emerging through devastation. Lisa. Her name, spoken for the first time, carried generations of loss and possibility. Whoever did this, they will answer. You have my protection. My resources. The truth, whatever it costs. He placed the bracelet back on her wrist, fingers lingering. Starting tonight, we find them. Outside, the gala continued oblivious, crystal chiming against wealth's indifferent rhythm. Inside the lab, machines hummed with genetic confirmation already processing. 2 lives, long severed, began their convergence. The investigation ignited like dry tinder, promising revelations that would scorch institutions and rewrite histories. Lisa touched the star engraving, no longer alone in her questions. Jorge watched her with eyes that saw his daughter reborn. The silent recognition had spoken. Now the reckoning began. The Gulf Stream cut through dawn clouds at 38,000 feet, its cabin hushed except for the low thrum of engines and the occasional rustle of documents. Lisa stared at the bracelet, catching slivers of sunlight, the engraved star now a compass pointing south. Jorge sat opposite, eyes closed but not sleeping, fingers steepled in the posture of a man recalculating every decision of 2 decades. Victor coordinated logistics via encrypted tablet. Ruiz reviewed Texas property records. Kim drafted subpoenas. The jet's trajectory mirrored their investigation. Forward motion toward a past determined to stay buried. They landed at Austin Bergstrom under a sky bleached white by heat. A convoy of black SUVs waited, discreet yet unmistakable. The retirement community, Sunridge Estates, sprawled across manicured acres like a luxury resort for the ethically flexible. Palm trees lined drives named after virtues. Integrity Lane, Honor Court. Dr. Harlan Voss resided at the end of Serenity Circle, a Spanish-style villa with terracotta tiles and security cameras that tracked their approach. Ruiz took point, badge flashing. NYPD Dr. Voss. We have questions about Harbor General, April 2003. The doctor, 75 now, opened the door in golf attire, tan leathery and eyes sharp behind bifocals. Surprise flickered, then calculation. Ancient history, he said, voice smooth as the bourbon on his breath. Statute of limitations applies to most sins. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and old money. Framed medical awards lined walls beside photos of Voss shaking hands with senators. Jorge entered last, presence filling the room like gravity. Voss paled. Mr. Ford. This is unexpected. Lisa stepped forward, bracelet glinting. You delivered my mother. Declared me stillborn. Explain. Voss's gaze fixed on the silver vines. Recognition hit like a slap. He recovered with practiced charm. Tragic case. Young woman,
Jorge's
terrible
voice cut
accident.
like steel.
I did what the family requested.
requested.
A live grandchild vanish. He placed Elena's death certificate on the coffee table. Then the falsified stillbirth report. Your signature. 3-minute discrepancy. NICU admission logged after death declared. Nurse Jenkins saw you hand the infant to a woman in a green coat. Voss's composure cracked. Sweat beaded despite air conditioning. Misremembered details. Trauma affects memory. Ruiz activated recording. We have Jenkins's sworn statement. Anonymous threats to her son. Your offshore accounts received 2 payments totaling $500,000. April 2003. Same week my granddaughter disappeared. The doctor's eyes darted to exits. Security blocked them. Kim slid a tablet across. Immunity requires full cooperation. Obstruction adds charges. Voss deflated. The fight leaking out like air from a punctured tire. It started with a call. He began, voice thin. Woman's voice, cultured, urgent. Said the Ford girl's pregnancy threatened inheritance lines. Offered payment to declare stillbirth. Arrange private adoption. I needed the money. Clinical trials were failing. Debts mounting. Lisa's stomach churned. You sold a baby. Voss flinched. I facilitated. The woman arrived April 8, garage level 3. Paid in cash, took the child. I altered records. Thought it ended there. He described the woman. Mid-40s, dark hair in a chignon emerald coat despite spring warmth, accent faintly European. Drove a rental sedan, plates swapped within hours. Jorge leaned in. Name. Voss hesitated. She signed nothing. Called herself Ms. Verdant. Gave a burner number, dead now. Victor's fingers flew across his device, cross-referencing. Verdant. Green. The coat. Patterns emerged. Kim pressed. You kept records. Voss retrieved a safe behind a false panel. Produced a ledger. One entry. April 8, 2003. Infant female Ford. Delivered to V. $250,000 balance. Ruiz bagged the ledger. You're coming with us. Voss nodded, resigned. The villa's serenity shattered as agents catalogued evidence. Outside, cicadas screamed in the heat. Back in the SUVs, Jorge placed a call. Vivian. Conference room, 1 hour. His tone promised reckoning. Lisa watched Austin's suburbs blur past, mind racing. Ms. Verdant. European accent. Access to Ford family dynamics. The pieces hovered, refusing to connect fully. The Manor's conference room felt smaller with tension. Vivian arrived in linen, concern etched like stage makeup. Uncle, the press is frantic. We need unified messaging. Her eyes flicked to Lisa, calculating. Jorge activated the screen. Voss's confession played. Volume low but damning. Vivian's composure slipped for a fraction of a second. This is monstrous. How can I help? By explaining this. Victor projected financial trails. Foundation funds, 2002 to 2003, routed through Vivian's international programs. Shell companies in Luxembourg. Payments mirroring Voss's deposits. Vivian paled. Coincidence. I manage dozens of initiatives. Lisa spoke for the first time. Ms. Verdant. Green coat. Your signature color. Vivian's hand went to her emerald brooch. Ridiculous. I was in Geneva when Elena died. Flight records contradicted. Vivian returned April 7th, departed April 9th. The timing aligned with the garage handover. Jorge's voice was quiet thunder. You feared Elena's child diluting your inheritance. Reginald's health failing. You orchestrated the separation. Vivian's denial came fast, but cracks showed. Kim laid out charges. Conspiracy, fraud, child trafficking. Vivian's lawyer arrived within minutes. A sign of preparedness. As Vivian was escorted out, Temporarily confined to quarters pending formal charges, Jorge turned to Lisa. "I trusted family. Blindly." His apology carried the weight of empire. Lisa shook her head. "We're learning together." Night settled over the manor. Lisa studied in the library, evidence textbooks open beside hospital schematics. Sophia video-called, face filled with worry and pride. "You okay, superstar?" Lisa managed a smile. "Getting there." The bracelet caught lamplight, star winking like approval. Ruiz entered with updates. Voss's phone records, 2003. One call to a Manhattan landline, registered to a law firm. Partners included Lena Kim, junior associate then. The room stilled. Kim, who had drafted their subpoenas, guided their legal strategy. Conflict of interest on a seismic scale. Jorge's resolve hardened further. No one is above this. He authorized internal audit of all foundation accounts, past and present. Lisa closed her textbook. Exams could wait one more day. Truth demanded precedence. In the quiet hours, Jorge found her on the terrace. Stars sprawled above like scattered diamonds. Elena loved this view, he said. She'd argue policy until dawn. Lisa listened as he shared stories. Elena's first protest at 16, her scholarship to Oxford, her refusal of trust fund life. The woman emerging was fierce, principled, alive in ways records never captured. Lisa touched the bracelet. She'd want justice not just for us. For every family torn apart. Jorge nodded. Then we widen the net. Voss was a cog. Verdant, Vivian, Kim, their symptoms. The system that enabled them, that's the disease. Dawn broke with new warrants. Kim, confronted with evidence, negotiated cooperation for leniency. Her confession filled gaps. Vivian's plan, executed with precision. The law firm facilitated adoption papers, routed the infant through state channels to obscure trails. Lisa Grant, nameless ward, perfect cover. With each revelation, Lisa's foster history gained context. The Johnsons' sudden financial strain, Mrs. Delgado's unexplained medical bills, placements shuffled like cards. Strings pulled from afar to keep her invisible. Self-reliance had been survival, not just character. Jorge funded a task force. Ruiz leading, Victor coordinating, Lisa consulting on systemic failures she'd lived. The investigation expanded beyond personal vendetta into institutional reform. Harbor General's maternity wing, long underfunded, became ground zero. Weeks later, indictments dropped. Vivian's trial promised spectacle. Voss testified, voice trembling but clear. Carla Jenkins appeared via video. Guilt finally lifting. The woman in the green coat remained a ghost, but leads pointed to European adoption rings tied to Vivian's overseas programs. Lisa returned to campus for delayed exams. Security subtle but present. She aced constitutional law, evidence, trial practice. Jorge attended graduation, pride shining through stoicism. The diploma read Lisa Grant Ford, a name she chose to honor. The manor's east wing became hers. Library stocked with law reviews and Elena's old journals. Sophia moved into guest quarters, appointed official morale officer. Evenings found Lisa and Jorge on the terrace, plotting next steps. The foundation shifted focus. Maternal justice, foster reform, transparency in adoption. 1 year later, the bracelet rested in a display case beside Elena's portrait, no longer needed on Lisa's wrist. She wore it only for court appearances, a reminder of origins and obligations. The star still caught light, but now illuminated paths forward. Threads unraveled completely, revealing a tapestry of greed and fear. In their place, new patterns emerged. Accountability, restoration, legacy redefined. The promise made in a laboratory at dawn had changed everything, not through wealth alone, but through the fierce determination of a granddaughter who refused to let history repeat. The Texas sun baked the tarmac as the Gulf Stream stairs unfolded with a hydraulic sigh. Lisa stepped onto the heat-shimmered runway, bracelet tucked beneath the sleeve of a charcoal blazer chosen for its anonymity. Jorge followed, cane tapping rhythmically, the sound swallowed by rotor wash from idling SUVs. Victor coordinated with local agents. Ruiz carried the warrant folder like a loaded weapon. Austin's skyline receded behind tinted windows as they sped toward Sunridge Estates, the retirement enclave where Harlan Voss waited under house arrest and the weight of his own cowardice. The villa on Serenity Circle looked smaller in daylight, its stucco walls bleached bone white. Federal marshals flanked the entrance. Voss sat in a wicker chair on the shaded patio, 65 and diminished, oxygen tubes snaking from his nose to a portable tank. The golfer's tan had faded to jaundice, liver spots dotted trembling hands. He did not rise when they entered. "Immunity papers," he rasped, gesturing to a side table. Kim verified signatures nodded. "Recording devices activated." "Start with the money," Ruiz said. Voss licked cracked lips. 80,000 cash. 2 installments. First half April 6th. Delivered to my locker at the country club. Second after the infant was placed. He described a manila envelope, no note, only crisp hundreds. Instructions came by phone. Woman's voice. Polish. Slight accent. French, maybe Swiss. Said the Ford girl's child complicated succession. Fake the stillbirth. Leave the baby at the east entrance with the bracelet as a keepsake. Clean. No adoption trail. Lisa's pulse thudded in her ears. Keepsake. The word twisted like a blade. Jorge's knuckles whitened on his cane. "You abandoned a newborn on concrete," he said, each syllable precise. Voss flinched. Threats followed. A week later, masked man in the parking garage. Knife across my ribs. He lifted his shirt to reveal a jagged scar, pale against sallow skin. Message delivered. Silence or family pays. His wife had left years earlier. His silence bought their safety. Victor projected call logs recovered from an old pager service. 3 incoming calls, April 5th through 7th, from a Manhattan payphone near Grand Central. "The accent," Kim prompted. Voss closed his eyes. Commanding, like she was used to being obeyed. Dropped consonants when agitated. Duval, I thought once, but she never gave a name. The convoy returned to the jet under gathering clouds. Lisa stared at hill country sliding beneath, piecing phonemes into a silhouette. Duval. Vivian's maiden name. French heritage from her mother's side. The accent surfaced under stress. Lisa remembered from board meetings, a lilt Vivian masked with Midwestern vowels. Back in New York, the Manor's war room hummed with forensic accountants. Kim, reinstated under strict oversight, presented findings on a wall of screens. Elena's personal estate, valued at $1.5 billion in tech stocks and real estate, had reverted to Jorge's cousin Reginald's line upon declaration of no surviving heir. Reginald, Vivian's late husband, benefited directly. "But look here," Kim said, zooming on transfers. Ford Foundation Holdings, March 2003. $200,000 to Dr. Leland Kane, listed as hospital administrative consultant. Kane oversaw maternity wing budgets. Further clicks revealed shell companies routed through the Caymans, ultimate beneficiary a trust controlled by Vivian's uncle. Payments continued quarterly until Kane's retirement in 2010. Total exposure, $4.8 million, Victor summarized. Enough to buy silence, equipment, loyalty. Jorge's expression could have frozen flame. Kane sat on the accident review board. Ruled hit and run, case closed. Lisa absorbed the implications. The crash that killed Elena, the separation of her child, the financial hemorrhage, all threads braided by the same hands. Night settled heavy. Lisa wandered the east wing, doubts circling like moths. Worthiness gnawed. She had scraped through life on grit and partial scholarships. Now billions waited, tainted by betrayal. Jorge found her in Elena's preserved study, surrounded by protest posters and dog-eared philosophy texts. He eased into a leather chair, cane across his lap. "You are measuring yourself against ghosts," he said gently. Elena gave her trust fund to literacy programs. She marched in the rain for hospital workers' rights. She would see you, law books under one arm, ramen in the other, and call you sister. He opened a drawer, produced a worn journal. Entries in Elena's looping script detailed arguments with board members, including Cain over maternity care funding. She fought for strangers. She would fight harder for blood. Lisa traced the ink. Kindness as rebellion. The doubt receded, not gone but manageable. Sophia arrived the next morning, laptop blazing. Deep dive on the accident, she announced, spreading printouts. The police report described Elena's sedan struck at high speed on a coastal curve, vehicle forced off the road into a ravine. No paint transfer, no witnesses. Case closed within 72 hours. A grainy news clipping showed the wreckage. Time-stamped 11:47 p.m. April 5. Another photo, background blurred, captured a figure in a green coat near the emergency bay doors hours later. Pixelated but the posture unmistakable. Lisa's phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single text. Stop digging or end like Elena. No punctuation, no signature, only menace. She showed Jorge immediately. Victor traced the burner to a tower near the manor. Signal bounced through VPNs. Inside job or someone close, he concluded. Security protocols escalated. Lisa's detail doubled, rotations randomized. Ruiz pulled hospital security footage. Grainy VHS transferred to digital. Frame by frame revealed Vivian, listed as family friend, entering through a side door at 12:03 a.m. the night of the crash. She spoke with Cain in a corridor, handed him an envelope, left at 12:17. Timing aligned with the payphone calls to Voss. Jorge convened the team at dawn. We go public after indictments. No more shadows. Lisa added a condition. We include the systemic failures. Every mother who lost a child to paperwork. Every ward shuffled without cause. The foundation drafted a transparency initiative. Cain's wing renamed the Elena Ford Justice Center. Indictments landed like thunder. Cain arrested at his Hamptons estate. Voss testified via video link, frailty no shield. Vivian's assets frozen, passport surrendered. Her trial promised front-page spectacle, but Lisa focused on smaller victories. A scholarship fund in Elena's name, pro bono legal clinics for foster youth. The anonymous texts ceased after the third burner was traced to a dumpster behind Vivian's former office. Silence felt like victory and warning both. Months later, Lisa stood in the rebuilt maternity ward, bracelet displayed in a glass case beside Elena's journal. Expectant parents toured, unaware of the history funding their care. Sophia snapped photos for the foundation newsletter. Jorge watched from a bench, pride softening the lines of grief. Lisa joined him. She'd approve, she said. Jorge nodded. She'd demand more. Together they walked into sunlight. Shadows of betrayal finally burned away by accountability's glare. The promise evolved. No longer vengeance but vigilance, ensuring no child vanished into silence again. The late summer humidity clung to Queens like a second skin when Lisa pushed open the door to her old flat. The security detail waited downstairs. She had insisted on 5 minutes alone to retrieve a single flash drive of case notes. The hallway smelled of Sophia's leftover curry and the faint mildew that never quite left the walls. She slipped the key into the lock, turned it, and stepped inside. The attack came without sound. A shadow detached from behind the door, arms snaking around her throat. The intruder's grip was professional, forearm thick with muscle, a faded tattoo of a coiled serpent visible where his sleeve rode up. Lisa's pulse spiked, but panic never took root. Foster care had taught her that hesitation killed faster than fists. She dropped her weight, twisted, and drove her elbow into the soft spot below his ribs. Air whooshed from his lungs. She followed with a knee to the groin, a move drilled into her by a social worker who moonlighted as a Krav Maga instructor. The man doubled. She stomped the instep, snatched the flash drive from the desk, and bolted. She was 3 flights down before he recovered. The detail swarmed the stairwell, weapons drawn. Suspect fleeing north on 46th. The lead agent barked into his calm. Sirens converged within minutes. Lisa leaned against the wall, chest heaving, tasting copper where she had bitten her tongue. The tattooed arm burned into memory. PD processed the scene with grim efficiency. Fingerprints lifted from the doorframe matched Vance Keller, 47, former military, current contractor for Ford Family Security. Authorization logs showed Vivian Ford had signed his access badge renewal 3 weeks prior. Keller was found 6 hours later in a Brooklyn motel, hanging from the shower rod, a typed suicide note confessing obsession with Lisa Grant Ford. The medical examiner's preliminary report arrived by dawn. Ligature marks inconsistent with self-infliction, petechial hemorrhaging suggesting strangulation before suspension. Murder staged to silence. Ruiz reopened Elena's accident file the same morning. A mechanic from a now-defunct coastal garage came forward after seeing Keller's face on the news. Trembling in the interrogation room, he confessed to tampering with brake lines on a silver sedan matching Elena's, April 5, 2003. Payment: $40,000 in cash, delivered by a woman in an emerald coat who spoke with a faint French lilt when agitated. Description aligned perfectly with Vivian Duval Ford under stress. Motive crystallized in the war room. Vivian's failed European ventures had left her drowning in debt by 2002. Her husband Reginald, Jorge's cousin, suffered worsening heart issues. Elimination of Elena and her unborn child secured the reversion of Elena's $1.5 billion estate to Reginald's line. Kane handled hospital cover-up. Voss executed the infant's disappearance. Keller years later enforced silence. Reginald's 2018 death from cardiac arrest now carried the shadow of induced failure. Jorge absorbed the revelations in silence, then invited Lisa to the manor's smaller dining room, away from screens and subpoenas. The table was set for two: roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, a bottle of sparkling cider. Family meals were Elena's battlefield, he said, carving with steady hands. She negotiated peace over pie. Between bites he sketched the Ford lineage on a napkin. Great-grandfather's telegraph patents, grandmother's real estate empire, Elena's refusal of board seats to advocate for workers. He taught Lisa valuation multiples, trust structures, the quiet power of voting shares. She listened, absorbing not just numbers but the rhythm of legacy. Sophia joined via video, digging through archived voicemails recovered from Kane's old office server. One file, dated April 4, 2003. Vivian's voice, clipped and commanding. "It's handled. The mechanic finishes tonight. Voss is prepared. Ensure the child vanishes cleanly." Voice analysis confirmed 98.7% match. The recording became the linchpin. Vivian's jealousy ran deeper than finance. Elena had been the favored child, brilliant and untamed, while Vivian navigated the family as an outsider married in. The Paris trip in March 2002 crystallized the fracture. Jorge had commissioned the bracelet as a baby moon gift. Silver vines for growth, a star for the child Elena carried. Vivian, childless and overlooked, watched the jeweler measure Elena's wrist with barely concealed resentment. The bracelet became symbol and wound, proof of bond she could never claim. Arrest warrant issued at 4:17 p.m. Vivian's passport triggered alerts at Teterboro Private Terminal. She boarded a Gulfstream registered to a shell company in her maiden name. Destination unreported. Air traffic control lost the transponder over the Atlantic. The hunter had become the hunted, but the chase was far from over. Chapter 5, Confessions in the Dark. By E. Will Liu. The transponder reappeared over Shannon, Ireland, then vanished again. By the time Interpol agents stormed the private hangar in Lisbon, Vivian Duval Ford had traded emerald silk for a navy trench coat and a forged passport in the name of Valerie Durand. She sat in the back of an unmarked van, wrists cuffed with plastic ties, the Atlantic wind whipping loose strands from her chignon. The flight had bought her 19 hours of freedom. Evidence had waited 22 years. Back in New York, the interrogation room at One Police Plaza smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Vivian faced Ruiz across a metal table, Attorney Kim observing through one-way glass. Lisa watched from the adjacent booth, Jorge's hand steady on her shoulder. The monitor displayed Vivian's face in high definition, makeup flawless, eyes defiant until the first file opened. Ruiz began with the offshore transfers. 4.8 million from Ford Foundation accounts to entities you controlled, 2002 to 2010. Kane's consulting fees. Voss's cash drops. Mechanics break job. Each document landed with a soft thud. Vivian's lips thinned. Coincidences of philanthropy. The mechanic's sworn video played next. Grainy footage of a younger Vivian in the emerald coat, counting bills under sodium lights. Voice analysis overlaid the April 4th voicemail. 98.7% match. Witness sketches from the hospital garage, the country club locker, the coastal ravine. Vivian's composure cracked like thin ice. It was never about the money alone, she said finally, voice stripped of its cultivated polish. The accent surfaced, pure Parisian suburbs. Elena had everything. Jorge's ear, the board's adoration, the child that would lock her legacy forever. Reginald was dying. I was drowning in ventures that bled cash. One heir removed, and the estate flowed to us. Clean. She detailed the stillbirth fiction with clinical detachment. Voss needed debt relief. Kane wanted expansion budgets. He offered both. The infant, alive, crying, perfect, was a liability. Adoption left trails. Abandonment at the entrance erased them. The bracelet, her gaze flicked to Lisa's wrist. A conscience gesture. Proof she came from somewhere. Lisa's stomach lurched. Conscience. The word tasted like rust. Vivian continued, momentum building. The accident required precision. The accomplice, a driver with gambling debts, sabotaged brakes on the coastal road. He died in a bar fight 6 months later. Convenient. She did not smile. Reginald's heart gave out in 2018. Digitalis in his evening bourbon. Slow, deniable. Control of the trust became absolute. Keller's murder sealed the confession. He panicked after the attack on Lisa failed. Threatened exposure. I arranged the motel, the note, the ligature. Cleaner than payroll. Ruiz leaned in. Accomplices. Kane takes 15 years, sings for the cameras. Voss cooperates, house arrest with oxygen. The driver's long dead. Keller's silenced. Vivian shrugged, a Gallic gesture of finality. Checkmate. The room emptied. Jorge guided Lisa to the manor solarium, glass walls fogged with late August heat. He poured 2 fingers of scotch for himself, sparkling water for her. My promise evolves, he said quietly. Your law degree, fully funded. A trust in your name alone, administered by attorneys you choose. The Foundation's maternal justice wing will bear Elena's name and your oversight. His voice cracked on the last word. No more stolen futures. Lisa nodded, numbness giving way to molten rage. Therapy began the next morning in a discreet office overlooking the park. Dr. Patel, recommended by the Foundation's Employee Assistance Program, listened without judgment as Lisa unpacked abandonment, assault, inherited betrayal. Sessions became ritual, Tuesdays at 10, Thursdays at 3. Words carved space for grief to breathe. Flashbacks arrived unbidden, stitched from Jorge's stories and Elena's journals. Paris, March 2002. Elena at 20, belly rounding under a linen dress, laughing as Jorge sketched bracelet designs on a cafe napkin. Vines for growth, star for the constellation we'll name her after, she had written. Activism meetings in Greenwich Village lofts. Pregnant belly leading the charge against hospital privatization. Phone calls to Jorge from protest lines, voice bright with purpose. The bond between father and daughter, fierce and uncomplicated. Now Lisa's inheritance and ache. Sophia arrived for the weekend, arms full of bodega snacks and righteous fury. They spread evidence across the library table like a grim picnic. Vivian's social media from 2003, Sophia said, scrolling. Photos of charity galas. Vivian's smile sharp beside Elena's glowing one. Comments beneath. So happy for the Ford family's next generation. Irony curdled the air. Media leaked late Sunday. An anonymous source, Victor's careful orchestration, fed the Times the confession transcript. Headlines detonated. Ford heiress orchestrated murder. Infant abduction. Protests gathered outside the foundation's Midtown offices, mothers with strollers demanding transparency. Hashtags trends. Hashtag justice for Elena. Hashtag no more stolen babies. The governor called for statewide hospital audits. Jorge addressed the cameras from the manor steps. Lisa at his side. We will fund independent oversight of every maternity ward in this state. No family will endure what ours has. His voice steady, eyes wet. Lisa added, and every foster child will have legal advocacy from day one. The crowd roared approval. Vivian's arraignment streamed live. She pleaded not guilty, bail denied. The courtroom sketches captured her in orange, chignon unraveling. Lisa watched from the solarium, therapy notebook open to a fresh page. Dr. Patel's assignment. Write the letter you'll never send. Ink flowed. Asterisk, you thought you erased me. You only forged me, asterisk. Jorge found her at dusk, letter sealed and burned in the fireplace. Tomorrow, he said, we break ground on the Elena Ford Justice Center. You'll cut the ribbon. Lisa managed a smile. The bracelet caught firelight, star winking like approval. Confessions had cracked the dark. Now light poured through. The courtroom in the Southern District of New York smelled of polished oak and tension thick enough to taste. Jury selection had taken 3 weeks. Voir dire weeded out anyone with even tangential Ford Foundation ties. By the time opening statements began on a crisp October morning, the gallery overflowed with reporters, activists, and mothers clutching photographs of missing children. Lisa sat in the front row, bracelet gleaming against the sleeve of a navy suit tailored to her exact measurements. Jorge flanked her left, Victor her right. Sophia Liv tweeted from the media pen, each post a pinprick in Vivian's carefully curated facade. Prosecutor Angela Chen moved with the precision of a surgeon. Her timeline projected on a 60-inch screen. April 5, 2003, brake sabotage. April 8, falsified stillbirth. April 8 to May 1, anonymous cash drops. Carla Jenkins testified first, voice steady despite age. She recounted the healthy cry, Voss's order, the garage handover. Cross-examination tried to paint memory as unreliable. Chen countered with contemporaneous notes Carla had hidden in a lockbox for 20 years. Dr. Harlan Voss followed, frail in a wheelchair, oxygen hissing softly. He detailed the $80,000, the knife scar, the woman in the emerald coat. Defense counsel suggested duress from Reginald Ford. Voss shook his head. Reginald was bedridden by then. Vivian ran everything. Financial experts traced every dollar. Cayman shells, Luxembourg trusts, Keynes consulting invoices. The mechanic's affidavit, notarized before his death in a 2004 bar fight, described the brake fluid drain and the woman who paid in 20s. Vivian's defense hinged on coercion. Her attorney, a silver-haired litigator from Los Angeles, argued Reginald orchestrated the scheme, Vivian merely the reluctant executor. Phone records demolished the claim. Reginald's last outgoing call was to his cardiologist, March 31st. Vivian's burner contacts with Voss, Kane, and the mechanic spanned April 2nd to 7th. The jury remained stone-faced. Lisa took the stand on day 9. She spoke without notes, voice clear. 7 foster homes before I was 12. Group homes where dinner was a choice between cereal or silence. The bracelet was the only constant. I thought it meant someone once wanted me. She met Vivian's eyes across the room. You left it as a keepsake. I wore it as armor. The gallery stilled. Even the court reporter's fingers paused. Cross-examination probed her law school funding, implying opportunism. Lisa's response cut clean. I earned every scholarship before I knew my last name was Ford. Jorge testified last. He described Elena's laugh echoing through the manor, her refusal of trust fund life, The Paris cafe where the bracelet was born. I failed her once, he said, voice rough. I promised Lisa I would not fail again. He detailed the trust, the Justice Center, the maternal advocacy network, every commitment public and irrevocable. The prosecutor rested. Closing arguments spanned 2 hours. Chen's final words. This was not impulse. It was architecture. A child erased, a mother murdered, a fortune secured. The defense pleaded diminished capacity. Grief over Reginald's illness. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vivian Ford, life without parole for murder in the first degree. Conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, fraud. Dr. Leland Kane, 15 years. Voss, time served plus 5 years probation. Fines totaled $23 million. Redirected to the Elena Ford Justice Center. Vivian stood as the verdict was read, face blank, then collapsed into her chair. Bailiffs cuffed her without ceremony. 3 days later, under a sky the color of wet slate, Jorge and Lisa drove to the small Westchester cemetery where Elena rested beneath a dogwood tree. They laid white roses and a single star-shaped pendant carved from the same silver as the bracelet. Jorge spoke first, voice low. She wanted to change the world one mother at a time. We're finishing the work. Lisa added a letter she had written in therapy. Words of forgiveness she did not yet feel but knew Elena would demand. Wind carried petals across the grass. Spring brought commencement. Lisa walked the stage at NYU Law, mortarboard tassel brushing the bracelet now worn openly. Jorge sat front row, eyes shining behind bifocals. Her diploma read cum laude. The dean announced the Elena Ford Justice Fellowship, funded in perpetuity, awarded to the graduate most dedicated to child welfare law. Lisa accepted with a speech on systemic reform. Every foster statistic a battle cry. Final loose ends tied in the weeks that followed. The accident driver, long deceased, was identified through dental records from the 2004 bar fight. Payment stubs in Vivian's seized files confirmed the $40,000. No accomplices remained unaccounted. Every method, from brake fluid to offshore routing, documented in trial exhibits. The conspiracy closed like a ledger balanced to zero. Summer settled over the manor. Lisa moved into the East Wing permanently. Office overlooking the gardens Elena had planted. Sophia took the guest suite, appointed director of digital outreach for the Justice Center. Evenings found Jorge teaching Lisa the intricacies of shareholder votes. Lisa teaching him TikTok trends. The bracelet rested in a shadow box beside Elena's portrait, no longer needed as armor but honored as origin. Trials of truth had ended. The work of justice had only begun. The first frost silvered the manor lawns on the morning Lisa carried the last box from her Queen's flat to the East Wing suite. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell on Vivian's life sentence. The headlines had cooled, the protests had morphed into policy forums, and the Elena Ford Justice Center's cornerstone now bore a discreet bronze plaque. For every child who arrives alone. Lisa set the box on the window seat overlooking the rose garden Elena had planted 2 decades earlier. The bracelet lay inside a velvet pouch, no longer worn daily but never far. Jorge met her in the corridor, leaning on the cane he hated but needed after a winter flare-up of arthritis. The trust documents are signed, he said without preamble. $100 million, principal locked until you're 30, income yours to deploy now. The Elena Ford Literacy and Legal Fund is seeded with another 50. His tone carried the same brisk efficiency he once reserved for hostile takeovers, but his eyes searched her face for the argument he knew was coming. Lisa folded her arms. I'm taking the pro bono fellowship at the Children's Defense Clinic. 40 hours a week, subway commute, court appearances in whatever shoes don't have holes. The trust can wait. Jorge exhaled through his nose. You'll accept a driver. I'll accept a Metro card. They stared at each other across the Persian runner until Jorge's mouth twitched. Compromise. Driver drops you at the courthouse. You walk the last 3 blocks. Builds character. Lisa laughed despite herself, the sound echoing off mahogany paneling. The clash lasted another week. Over office space, she wanted the converted stables. He offered the executive floor. Over security protocols, she disabled the panic button twice. Over holiday plans, she insisted on cooking. He hired a Michelin chef. Each skirmish ended the same way. Jorge yielding ground
The Lisa
while pretending
Grant
it was
Act
his
passed
idea
the state
all
senate
along. In February, sponsored by a freshman assemblywoman who had once been a harbor general nurse. The bill mandated immediate DNA sampling for every abandoned infant, cross-referenced against missing persons databases, with hospital verifications audited quarterly by an independent board. Harbor General's maternity wing, now the Elena Ford Pavilion, installed biometric locks, redundant surveillance, and a social worker station staffed 24/7. Ruiz, promoted to captain, led a statewide healthcare fraud task force that closed 11 cold cases in the first quarter, each involving falsified birth records and offshore payments. Lisa's corner office in the converted stables smelled of fresh paint and coffee. She hung her diploma beside a framed photo of Elena at a protest, megaphone raised, belly proudly rounded. The Children's Defense Clinic became her laboratory. She represented a 12-year-old whose foster placement dissolved after a paperwork error. She sued a hospital that discharged a newborn to the wrong relative. She argued before the state Supreme Court that best interest of the child must include genetic identity. Wins stacked up like law review citations. Board meetings for the Elena Ford Foundation took place in the Manor's former music room, sunlight striping the table through leaded windows. Lisa sat to Jorge's right, laptop open to foster system data dashboards. She pushed for microgrants, $500 stipends for aging out youth to cover security deposits, $1,000 for professional clothing. Jorge countered with matching corporate partnerships. They compromised at $750 plus mentorship. The first cohort graduated community college with zero debt. The second launched a coding boot camp in Elena's name. Thanksgiving arrived with snow flurries and the scent of sage. Lisa commandeered the kitchen at dawn, elbow deep in cornbread stuffing while Jorge set the table with china he hadn't touched since Clara died. Sophia arrived with empanadas and a scholarship letter. Full ride to Columbia's MSW program, funded by the Foundation's new Latinx Leadership Initiative. They ate until buttons strained, then played Monopoly on the library rug. Lisa bankrupted Jorge with ruthless boardwalk hotels while Sophia filmed the surrender for TikTok. The bracelet sat on the mantel, catching firelight like a quiet witness. Civil suits wrapped in December. The Foundation recovered $42 million from Vivian's frozen assets. Kane's estate coughed up another $8.3 million before probate. Every dollar flowed into the trust or the charity. No personal enrichment, no ambiguity. The Manor's East Wing became Lisa's permanent address, but the Queen's flat stayed on a month-to-month lease. A stubborn reminder that roots could be chosen, not just inherited. Spring brought shared hobbies. Jorge taught her to sail on the Sound, wind snapping the jib while he barked orders about trimming the main. She taught him to argue like a public defender, cross-examining his merger strategies until he conceded flaws in due diligence. Evenings ended on the terrace with legal pads and lemonade, planning the next reform bill. The bracelet traveled in a small leather case, worn only for court victories or foundation galas. One July morning, Lisa found Jorge in the rose garden, pruning Shear's idol in his hand. "I used to think legacy was stock price," he said. "Turns out it's whether someone fights for strangers because they know what it's like to be one." He handed her the shears. "Your turn." She clipped a dead bloom, placed it in the compost. "Elena's roses," she said. "They keep coming back." Jorge nodded, eyes on the horizon where the Sound met sky. No confusion remained about money, motive, or family. The trust grew at 4.2%. The charity served 3,400 children in its first year. The Lisa Grant Act had been adopted by 2 neighboring states. Vivian's appeals crawled through federal courts, destined for denial. The driver, the mechanic, Kane, Voss. Every participant accounted, every method exposed. Night settled soft and certain. Lisa stood at her office window, city lights flickering beyond the estate walls. The bracelet lay on the desk beside a new case file, A newborn found at a Brooklyn firehouse, DNA already processing. She smiled, rolled up her sleeves, and began to read. Bonds rebuilt were stronger than blood. They were chosen, daily, deliberately. And they held. The courtroom in Brooklyn Family Court smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat on a humid June morning 1 year to the day since Vivian's final appeal died in the Second Circuit. Lisa stood at the petitioner's table, sleeves rolled high, arguing for emergency custody of a 3-day-old infant discovered in a laundromat bassinet. The case file read like a cruel echo. No parents, no note, only a knitted cap with a single embroidered star. Hospital intake had flagged the DNA protocol mandated by the Lisa Grant Act. Within 48 hours, a match surfaced to a missing teenager from Syracuse. Lisa's voice carried steady across the bench. Your Honor, the mother is 16, terrified, and already en route with a social worker. Denying reunification risks another generation lost to the system I know too well. The judge granted temporary guardianship to the state with supervised maternal visitation. Lisa exhaled, the victory small but seismic. Another child would not grow up wondering why the stars looked different on her skin. Back at the manor that evening, Jorge waited in the library with a manila folder and a velvet box. The folder held the complete Ford Ramirez family tree, inked on archival paper. Branches sprawling from Galician immigrants to Silicon Valley patents, Elena's name circled in gold. Beside it lay Elena's final diary. Leather cracked but pages pristine. Jorge's hands trembled slightly as he pushed them across the table. I thought hoarding memories honored her. Turns out sharing them keeps her alive. A minor arrhythmia had landed him in the cardiac wing for 48 hours the previous month. Tests confirmed a benign flutter, medication adjusted, prognosis excellent. The scare stripped away his last pretense of invincibility. Read tonight, he said. Then we talk. Lisa opened the diary under the green banker's lamp. Entries spanned Elena's pregnancy. Sonograms taped beside protest schedules, sketches of nursery murals, a pressed violet from the Paris cafe where the bracelet was born. One page, dated April 4, 2003, read. Asterisk if anything happens, tell my daughter the world is broken in places but never beyond repair. Love fiercely, argue louder, never apologize for taking space. Asterisk tears blurred the ink, but Lisa did not wipe them away. She slipped on the new bracelet Jorge had commissioned. Identical vines, a second star engraved Lisa and Elena and Jorge. The metal settled warm against her pulse. The Times profile ran the following Sunday above the fold. From abandoned to advocate. Lisa Grant Ford rewrites child welfare law. The photographer captured her in the stable's office, sleeves rolled, bracelet catching sunlight. She spoke of resilience not as a buzzword but as daily choice. Choosing to show up for strangers because someone once failed to show up for her. Jorge's quote closed the piece. My granddaughter taught me that legacy is measured in second chances given, not billions banked. Vivian's final appeal crumbled in a 12-page opinion citing overwhelming evidence and lack of reversible error. The Supreme Court denied certiorari without comment. Her prison transfer to a federal facility in Connecticut became administrative footnote. Her name stripped from foundation letterhead. Her portrait removed from the Manor's West Gallery. The legal chapter closed with the quiet finality of a judge's gavel in an empty room. Forgiveness arrived for Lisa not in a thunderclap but in increments. Therapy sessions shifted from processing betrayal to integrating heritage. She forgave the system that failed her by dismantling its flaws. She forgave Vivian by refusing to let bitterness rent space in her future. Jorge found peace in the garden, pruning roses at dawn while reciting Elena's protest chants under his breath. The arrhythmia scare had reminded him that time was finite. He spent it deliberately. Sailing lessons with Lisa, guest lectures at her clinic, anonymous scholarships for every foster youth who scored above 1400 on the SAT. Sophia's wedding in September painted the manor in marigold and ivory. The ceremony took place beneath the dogwood where Elena rested. The reception spilled across the terrace strung with Edison bulbs. Sophia's dress shimmered like sunrise on water. Her vows to Matteo, a pediatric resident she met volunteering at the Justice Center, promised partnership in every language they spoke. Lisa, maid of honor in sage silk, delivered a toast that began with bodega empanadas and ended with a statistical likelihood of 2 foster kids finding chosen family. Jorge walked Sofia down the aisle when her father's flight from San Juan was delayed, his cane tapping a proud rhythm. He cried openly during the father-daughter dance, spinning Sofia to Celia Cruz while Lisa filmed on her phone, tears and laughter indistinguishable. The bracelet, both of them, caught the light as Lisa danced with Jorge later, his steps careful but determined. Elena would have hated the string quartet, he said, but loved the open bar. Lisa laughed into his shoulder. No tensions lingered. Not about trust distributions, not about security details, not about whose turn it was to choose the holiday menu. The family tree had grown new branches, grafted by choice and tempered by trial. Winter returned softer. Lisa's pro bono docket filled faster than she could clear it, but she hired 2 associates from the fellowship program she once needed. Jorge's health stabilized. He swam laps in the heated pool each morning, arguing with the physical therapist about stroke efficiency. The Justice Center broke ground on a second location in Syracuse, timed to coincide with the laundromat baby's first birthday. The teenager, now 18 and studying nursing, cut the ribbon beside Lisa. 1 year dissolved into routine and ritual. Sunday dinners rotated kitchens. Lisa's vegan experiments, Jorge's perfected paella, Sofia's experimental fusion. The diaries lived on the library shelf beside Lisa's growing collection of case law. The bracelets, mothers and daughters, rested in a double shadow box above the fireplace, catching firelight on ordinary evenings. Echoes of the past no longer haunted. They harmonized, a quiet chorus beneath the life they built note by deliberate note. On the anniversary of the verdict, Lisa stood at Elena's grave with a single white rose and the new bracelet warm on her wrist. Jorge placed a star-shaped pendant at the base of the dogwood. They did not speak. Words had become unnecessary. The wind carried petals across the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed in a language Lisa now understood as home. Snow dusted the dogwood in a gentle hush as Lisa closed the wrought iron gate behind her. 2 years had passed since the wedding lights blinked out over the terrace. 2 years since the bracelets settled into their shadow box like twin constellations. The petals she had left that morning were already buried under fresh powder, but the earth smelled of promise and pine. She pressed gloved fingers to the engraved stone, Elena Ramirez Ford, 1982-2003, and whispered the same words she spoke every anniversary. We kept building. Then she turned toward the waiting SUV, where Mateo held their daughter, Elena Sofia, bundled in a star-patterned blanket, and Jorge waited with the patience of a man who finally understood time. The national expansion began with a phone call from a Senate aide in early spring. The Lisa Grant Act had proven itself in New York. Abandoned infant DNA matches up 40%. Hospital fraud down 62%. Foster to permanency timelines cut by half. The aide wanted a federal version. Lisa flew to D.C. with a binder thick as a phone book. Data dashboards, survivor testimonies, cost-benefit analyses that made even fiscal conservatives lean forward. She testified before the Health and Human Services Subcommittee in a charcoal suit and the new bracelet, voice steady as she recited the laundromat baby's reunification statistics. Jorge watched the C-SPAN feed from the manor, texting real-time notes on lobbying strategy. The bill, officially the Elena Ford Child Protection Act, moved through markup with surgical amendments. Lisa camped in Senate corridors, trading coffee for co-sponsors, citing Elena's diary entries on maternal justice like scripture. A filibuster threat from a pharmaceutical state senator dissolved after the Justice Center released a report on kickbacks in neonatal drug trials. The House companion bill, shepherded by the same assemblywoman who once changed Harbor General diapers, passed 312 to 118. President signed it on the South Lawn in October. Lisa at his right, Jorge at his left, Mateo holding 2-year-old Elena Sofia on his hip. The pen used for the signature now lived in the Justice Center's lobby, encased beside the original bracelet. Jorge announced retirement the same week, effective January 1st. He transferred voting control of Ford Technologies to a blind trust with Lisa as sole beneficiary, then spent mornings in the stable's office teaching her the difference between EBITDA and free cash flow. "Numbers are just stories in disguise," he said, tapping a spreadsheet. "Tell the one where no child sleeps in an office again." They co-authored the book in stolen hours, The Price of Silence, A Conspiracy of Blood and Billions. Lisa wrote the foster chapters. Jorge handled corporate malfeasance. Sophia fact-checked every footnote. Publication proceeds. $4.2 million in the first year. Split between the National DNA Database and a scholarship fund for first-generation law students. The hardcover sat on nightstands from Park Avenue to public housing, dog-eared and underlined. Mateo had entered the story quietly. The pediatric resident who treated a clinic kid Lisa represented pro bono. Their first date was takeout arepas on a courthouse bench after a late hearing. Their second was sailing with Jorge, who grilled Mateo on immunization schedules until Lisa threatened mutiny. Proposal came on the manor dock at sunset. Ring a simple band etched with tiny stars. The wedding was small. Justice sent a garden, wildflowers, Sophia officiating with a license earned online. Jorge walked Lisa down an aisle of rose petals, cane tapping proud rhythm, eyes wet but smiling. Pregnancy announced itself with morning sickness during a Senate briefing. Lisa powered through, crediting ginger chews and sheer spite. Elena Sophia arrived at 3:17 a.m. on a stormy April night. Same hour, different outcome. Jorge held her first, whispering Galician lullabies his own grandmother sang. The cycle renewed in a single breath. Great-grandfather to great-granddaughter, loss transmuted into fierce protection. The book tour ended with a final grave visit on a crystalline November afternoon. Lisa carried Elena Sophia in a sling. Mateo pushed Jorge in a lightweight wheelchair borrowed for the uneven path. They laid a wreath of white roses and baby's breath. Jorge spoke first, voice steady. "I promise truth, protection, family. You kept every bargain, Mija." Lisa added a letter written in labor, sealed with wax, words for the daughter who would one day ask why her name carried weight. Mateo placed a tiny star pendant at the stone's base. The wind carried snowflakes like confetti. Epilogue voice, soft as snowfall. "I was never lost, only hidden. A star tucked inside a system that forgot how to look up." Jorge's promise, spoken in a laboratory at dawn, repeated in courtrooms and rose gardens, changed everything. Not because billions followed, but because belief did. Truth is the sharpest inheritance. Justice is the garden we tend together. Healing is the quiet moment when a child sleeps knowing tomorrow is promised. If you hold this book, hold a child, hold a vote. Be the keeper of that promise. Plant a star where darkness tried to root. The cycle renews with every hand that refuses to let go. They walked back to the SUV. 4 generations in footprint and spirit. Elena Sophia reached for snowflakes, laughing at their cold kisses. Lisa adjusted the bracelet. Now 3 stars etched. Elena, Lisa, Elena Sophia. Jorge watched from the window, eyes bright with a particular piece of a man who has seen the story finish better than it began. The manor lights winked on as dusk settled, warm against the gathering dark. Inside, dinner waited, paella, arepas, ginger cookies shaped like stars. Outside, the Justice Center's new national headquarters broke ground at dawn, DNA kits already en route to every state. The book sat on 1 million nightstands. The law protected 1 million more children. The bracelets gleamed in their case, catching firelight, reflecting a family forged not by blood alone but by the fierce choice to keep showing up. Promises fulfilled are not endings. They are the moment the story hands you the pen.